Hi ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the very first review of my Donkey Kong Country marathon, starting of course with the very first Donkey Kong Country, the original one, the one that started it all. And as you see, I'm actually in a different place than you generally see most of my reviews, because I chose to do this upstairs where Super Nintendo is located and make it more thematic, more... Because yeah, that's where Super Nintendo is located, so I decided to again do this, all those reviews where Super Nintendo is located upstairs, where most of my life Super Nintendo was located anyway. And so, welcome to the review of the very first Donkey Kong Country, the one that started it all. The story of the game is pretty paper thin, like Mario, although I do feel there's just a little bit more story in Donkey Kong, but only by a very tiny margin, not really much difference. And the story is that the bananas of the Kongs get stolen by the Kremlin crew, and Donkey and Diddy have to reclaim their bananas. And yes, that probably sounds as paper thin like Mario, which is pretty much an excuse story for the game, which it objectively kind of is, but as I just said, I do think there's just a little bit more story in here than it is in the Mario games. We'll get to it later, but as I said, not by much. And in the original SNES version, which is the version we are talking about, that what's happening is only seen in the game's manual, but in the Game Boy Advance remake actually, there is a whole cutscene about the bananas getting stolen and all that. And what is the relationship between Donkey and Diddy? As a little kid, I always liked thinking they were father and son, but it's decidedly not the case. Some fans speculate they're brothers, but it also seems very unlikely. But most common theory now is that they are cousin or uncle and nephew, which I admit I do kind of like that interpretation, since I'm an uncle to a little nephew myself, but whatever, who cares? Great game, great characters. The gameplay of the game is really awesome and so much fun. It's a 2D platformer, and the two playable characters are of course the aforementioned Donkey Kong himself, as well as his nephew, cousin, whatever, Diddy Kong. And Donkey Kong is much bigger and stronger than Diddy Kong, but Diddy Kong on the other hand is much faster and lighter, and I actually very much prefer to play as Diddy Kong. He's just so much easier and much more fun to control. Like, the only advantages that Donkey Kong has that Diddy Kong doesn't really have are that because Donkey Kong is stronger, there are like few strong enemies like Crucias or Clumps that Diddy Kong really can defeat, because he's just so much smaller than Donkey Kong. Like, so the only way to defeat them is like either throw a barrel at them, which either one of them can do, or jump on them as Donkey Kong. But then again, it's not really that much of a huge advantage of Donkey Kong, because Diddy Kong anyway can find different ways around to defeat them. Like he can roll under Clump's legs, or just pick a barrel and defeat Crucia. So yes, other than just being able to jump on the stronger enemies that Diddy Kong really can do, there is not really much advantage to play as Donkey Kong, so I very much prefer to play as Diddy Kong. Although, if you have Diddy Kong and Donkey Kong together, whichever one of them is the front, and you lose your life, then you're left to play with the Kong that's left. And if the other Kong gets defeated, then you lost a level and have to start over again. What's also really interesting is that even though the sequels are so much better and improve on this game in almost every way, but from a pure objective standpoint, this is basically the most classic Donkey Kong Country game in every way, and it's basically the only game where you actually play as Donkey Kong himself. But we'll talk more about those details when we talk about the sequels. But yes, even if I think the sequels are much better, this is still very much the most classic Donkey Kong Country game. The game takes place on the Donkey Kong Isle and its various different diverse areas. First there is Congo Jungle, which is where Kongs live, and those levels, most of them are regular jungle levels with one cave and underwater level. Speaking of which, I really love underwater stages. They're so relaxing, complete with amazing music that perfectly fits with underwater theme. I mean, it's so relaxing and haunting at the same time. And then there are monkey mines where Kremlings clearly took over and created mines, as well as train cards in the Indiana Jones style. We'll get to it later. Next, we are back into jungle levels, this time called Vine Valley, although now the jungle looks somewhat closer to rainforest since it clearly is much bigger. And there is also Indiana Jones style temple. Afterwards, there is Gorilla Glacier, which is the highest peak of Donkey Kong Isle, and it's winter and snow. Again, don't ask how high it is that there manages to be snow on Jungle Island. Just love another amazing, beautiful area in an awesome game with new awesome levels. Afterwards, there is another area taken over by King K. Rool and his crew, where they establish their factories and are polluting this area of an island. And final area is Chimp Caverns, which, as the name implies, is a very large cavern. And there are some more mines here too, again, most likely established by the Kremlings. And there is my childhood favorite level here too, Loopy Lights. Now, I don't really have a favorite level, I just love the game as a whole. But Loopy Lights was my favorite level in childhood. And an amazing thing that accompanies every single level in the game is the fantastic music. Like, I literally think that the soundtrack for Donkey Kong Country is literally one of the best video game soundtracks ever. I mean, the soundtrack of the sequel is even better, but still, the soundtrack of Donkey Kong Country is still very much amazing in its own right, and it just adds so much atmosphere to every single level and makes them feel so much more alive. And I say it's far more atmospheric than almost any soundtrack in the modern game. Every single level in Donkey Kong Country is very different. Like, while they might have some things in common with each other, it's impossible to really confuse any level with any other. Every level does something very unique. Like, look at cave levels. This is the very first cave level, and later you get a similar one, but now it is dark and Squawks has to shine through the flashlight. And this is the final cave level, but this time this cave is all green and somehow creepier from the previous ones, and certainly harder too. There are also two temples, like kind of a temple of King Louie in Jungle Book or in Indiana Jones. And there are underwater levels too, which I've already been speaking about because they have some of the best soundtrack in the game, which says a lot. And first two being pretty similar to each other, but next one being under frozen water, and don't ask how Kongs survive, just have a good time. And next in the Krem Industries, where you swim under a polluted water. And as a kid, I did notice that the water was so green, but I never knew it was polluted. Like, how could I? I was just a kid who just enjoyed playing a game, but now, playing as an adult, it can be a pretty different experience. Or there are two factory levels, which are very similar to each other and same music, but in the first one there are plenty of barrels with fires that Donkey and Diddy have to jump on when there is no fire to get further in the level, and in the second one, lights turn off and absolutely nothing is visible, not even enemies, only Donkey and Diddy, but it's actually pretty challenging, but just so much fun. And then again, I've been playing it so many times, it's actually pretty easy for me by now. Or jungle levels. The very first level in the game is a jungle level, and it's jungle during daytime, and then the very second level is again a jungle, but it's nighttime and it's raining. And then a little bit later in the game we have another jungle level, and this time it's with the sunset. And by the way, I think the look at the sunset in this level is still very impressive to this day. It was very impressive back when I played it, and I still think it looks amazing and beautiful and impressive to this day. And there are also mine levels, like for example Stop and Go Station, where there are those enemies rock rocks where you just have to press a stop and the enemies fall asleep. Or Loopy Lights, which is entirely in the dark unless you turn on the lights. And as I already said before, Loopy Lights is my childhood favorite level. Now, I don't really have a favorite, but in childhood it was Loopy Lights, so I still have this kind of nostalgic feeling towards it because it was my favorite level in my childhood. And also, within the levels, there are also bonus rooms, and in order to get 100% game completion, you do have to find all the bonus rooms. I admit, I actually never found it 100% all of them, but largely it's because I don't really think it's worth it, because really, unlike in the following two games, which we'll certainly talk when we get to the following two games, but unlike in the following two games, really, other than Cranky Kong just saying you're almost as good as him, finding all those bonus rooms doesn't really bring you much, honestly, although they are pretty fun. But finding them all is like really difficult anyway. Often it requires for you to either take a leap of faith, and at one point there is even a bonus room within a bonus room that believe it or not, I only discovered it like a year ago only. For so many years of having this game that's older than me, I only discovered a year ago that there is a point where you find a bonus room within a bonus room. There are plenty of animal bodies in this game. There is everyone's favorite rhino Rambi, and in this game he's by far my favorite of all the animal bodies, and also one of my two favorites of all of them in the franchise as a whole. My other favorite one actually comes in the sequel, but we'll talk about them in the sequel. And I also just love how Rambi runs around and can easily defeat enemies and make them fly or hit walls and uncover secret caves. And there is Express of the Ostrich, who admittedly is slightly annoying. He doesn't really fight, just flies high and helps you reach sometimes otherwise unreachable areas, which is necessary if you want 100% completion of the game to find all bonus rooms. There is Angar the Swordfish, who shows up in the underwater levels, and I also think he's pretty awesome. Plus Winky the Frog, who can also jump high, and Skokes the Parrot, who only appears in one level, a cave level where he's holding a flashlight and lighting the way for you. I already talked a bit about this level already. Plenty of the things that this game was capable back in the day were just so impressive and full of wonder. As a little kid, when you beat the first level and it turns to nighttime right at the end, or in this Gorilla Glacier level, it starts snowing right in the middle of the level, or the whole 3D aspect of the game. Like, all that stuff might not seem much right now, but trust me, back when I was a little kid playing this game, it was all so impressive. And I already said before, like classic Super Mario, you can't really say there is much story in this game, really just an excuse story for the sake of the gameplay, although, as I said then, I do think there is just slightly more story here than Mario, but we'll talk even more about it when I discuss the sequels. But to give you an example in this game, like for example, look at Kremlin Industries. This is an area on Donkey Kong Isle where Kremlings took over and built their factories, and as a result, the aforementioned water is polluted and you also travel through the factories. Yup, I really like how the levels are somewhat interconnected with the story of what is going on and all that. As much as I love Donkey Kong Country, if I'm being objective, I can't say this game is completely flawless, and there are several things in the game that have in fact aged pretty badly, especially when two much better sequels came out, and that's actually probably the biggest flaw of this game. As amazing as it is, it just can't hold a candle to either of the two sequels, because the sequels are just so much better in every way than this game. They basically perfected everything that was amazing in this game, but we'll discuss it in much more detail once we actually do discuss the sequels, because let's focus on this game, because one area especially that's so much better than the sequels is the boss battles, because if you compare the boss battles in the next two games, bosses here, like the boss battles in this game, objectively aren't particularly good. In addition to being super easy, they're really nothing more than just bigger versions of regular enemies. Nothing more really. Like, some bosses even get repeated as recolored versions of them, and Cranky Kong even addresses it in the Game Boy Advance version. Like, the first boss, Very Naughty, is just a very big naughty, and I generally beat him before I even finish a sentence. He's so easy. And in Gorilla Glacier, a boss is really naughty, who's just a pink Very Naughty, and a larger version of the naughty from the Indiana Jones Temple levels. Queen Bee is just a giant zinger. I mean, she's the queen of them all, so I guess it makes sense in her case. But thankfully, the final boss, the main villain of the game, King K. Rool, who is basically Donkey Kong's version of Bowser though, so yeah, the final boss, King K. Rool, he's awesome though. Awesome music, and just fighting him on the pirate ship Gangplank Galleon, and then you think you beaten him and see the credits, and at this point, I'm used to it, but as a kid, when I first saw it, I was like just so shocked and like in complete disbelief and even a little scared as you think you've beaten him only to see him wake up and then a last third of the boss battle against him. Donkey Kong Country truly is masterful, and this game truly embodies my childhood. And this is really only phase 1 of our journey, because we might have completed the review of Donkey Kong Country, but the reviews of the following 2 sequels are only about to begin, and I say they're both much better than the original. The sequel, Donkey Kong Country 2, elevated upon everything that made the original fantastic and improved upon it in every way. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the review of Donkey Kong Country, but soon expect a review of Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest. Again, we might have completed Donkey Kong Country, but Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest is about to begin soon, so see you then.